Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Sukkah Daf Dalid discusses various ways a person can fix a situation in which his sukkah is too tall or too short. We know that the maximum height of a sukkah is 20 amos, and the minimum height of a sukkah is 10 tefachim. What happens if it's too tall or too short? What steps can you take to make the high sukkah shorter? By maybe lifting the floor, raising the floor, filling it in, or to make the short sukkah taller by perhaps digging out the floor. The Gemara will discuss a number of different scenarios in which you did a partial filling, a partial lifting, or a partial digging out, and when they work. Or if you filled it up with the various materials, which materials can you assume are going to stay there, and therefore they work. The Gemara will get into a number of Lamdish halachas of Sukkah, which we've also seen in Erevin, such as good atik mechitza, good achas mechitza, deifin akuma, and several of these Sukkah halachas. So first of all, the Gemara is discussing what happens if your Sukkah is too tall and you want to raise the floor. So if you fill in the entire floor and you raise the floor, that's fine. The sukkah roof is now shorter from the floor. It is less height from the floor, and that's okay. The question is, what material did you use to fill in the floor? The floor has to be raised permanently. It has to be something which is going to stay there, at least for the entire 7 days of Sukkot. So Gemara says straight out, if you use pillows and blankets, even if you say, I'm going to leave these here forever, that doesn't count. Nobody leaves their pillows and blankets forever. They don't become permanently affixed to the floor. And even if you say that you do intend to leave them there forever, your das is batal to other people's das, and that does not count. Gemara then discusses what happens if you use straw, or if you fill it in with dirt, with afar. Now, the Gemara, and it's bringing examples of straw and dirt, also mentions tzoros, which is gravel. Rashi says that tzoros should have the same halacha as the dirt. And we divide up the categories of how much intent you have to leave it there, how permanent the things that you're leaving on the floor there. We divide up into 4 levels of intent. Number 1 is if you're mevatla. That's if you say clearly, I'm intending to leave this here forever. The next level below that is if you do not say that, but you have no plans. You have no need for it. You have no plans to actually remove it, but you don't actually say you're leaving it there. The next level above that is where you just put it down, and there are no plans. It's not that you have no plans, it's not that you have plans, there is no information available. You neither have plans nor you have no plans. And the next level above that is where you do have actual plans to remove it. You're going to need it soon. And it's called asid lifnaisi. You're planning to remove it. So the highest level where you intend to leave it there, you're mevatlet. So both straw and the dirt, the tevin and afar, that counts, that's good. And there it is a permanent fixture, and the sukkah is now kosher. On the opposite extreme, if you have plans to remove it, it doesn't work for either of them. It's possible it is not a good filler, and therefore the sukkah is still too tall. Now, the middle cases, that's what we will discuss. What we call ein asad lifnaisei. You have no plans to move it, which is the same as saying you have plans to leave it there, although you weren't actually mevatel it. Or when it's a stam, there's no information available. So the Gemara says it's a machlokes, and teven is more likely to be moved away. Straw is more likely to be removed than the dirt. So the Gemara lays it out as follows: if it's stam and it's teven, then it's no good. That's for sure no good. Where we have no information, we do not have any understanding that it's planning to be left there, and it's talking about straw, that's no good. Everybody agrees to that. 2 cases where there's clearly a machlokas, which the Gemara says is a machlokas, is straw when you do not plan to move it. That's straw on level 2. Straw when you don't plan to move it. Or dirt, which is better than that, but it is 1 level further from being permanent, and that's straw where there's no information available, there's no plans either way. So those 2 are machlokes between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yosi. The Gemara brings a brisa of the Rabbanan who spell out clearly that they say that this is no good, it's not considered a permanent filler, and Rabbi Yosi who says it is a permanent filler, and that's okay. Now Rashi adds that the case of dirt, where you plan on leaving it there, that is also a machlokes. The Yossi spells out his opinion clearly that that's kosher. The Rabbanan didn't spell it out clearly, but the Rabbanan referred to tzoros, which is gravel, and Rashi says that's the same as dirt, and therefore it counts as if you're planning on removing it, and therefore they would argue, and they would also say that that's no good. Okay, so those are the opinions in those two types of materials. Now the Gemara goes on to discuss another scenario, and that's what if the schach is too high, the sukkah is too tall, but some of the branches are hanging down into the sukkah. They're hanging to a height which is kosher. So Gemara says that if the parts that are hanging into the kosher space, the parts that are hanging to within 20 amos, if those are enough branches to make more shade than sun, if those would be the only schach, then it's kosher, meaning we ignore everything that's above 20 amos. If this part which is hanging to within 20 amos is kosher because it's more shade than sun, then it's a kosher sukkah, otherwise it's not. Now, what if it's the opposite? What if you have a sukkah where the schach is just barely tall enough, it's 10 tvachim tall, and some of the branches are hanging to within the 10 tvachim. So Abai wants to say the same thing. You look at what's hanging, and if the part that's hanging is not enough to count the schach, that means if it's more sun than shade, then you could ignore it. And you don't have to worry about it. You could say, I could ignore that part, because it's even if that would be the only schach, it would be puzzle anyway. I think I could ignore the hanging part, and I could just look at the part which is above 10 tvachim, and that's a kosher, that's fine. That's what Abai wanted to say, but Rava said, no, that doesn't work. You cannot use it. You cannot use the flip side of the first halacha this way. And that's because a sukkah with stuff hanging into it, where the ceiling is hanging into, but too short of a sukkah, is not a normal house. You cannot live in a house that has things so low, so short. That's the problem. So if something's hanging into the minimum space that you need, that's a puzzle sukkah. Nothing to do with whether it counts as a schach or not as far as sun and shade ratio. Okay, now the Gemara refers to where you build a platform into the sukkah, and you build a platform to try to raise the floor so that you can minimize the height. Again, we're referring to where the ceiling was too high. And you build a platform. So the Gemara discusses where you build a platform only against one wall of the sukkah. So the Gemara discusses two scenarios. Where do you build a platform exactly? So let's think of the sukkah as having three walls, shaped like a ches. There's three walls, so you have the middle wall and the two side walls. So if you build a platform against the full length of the middle wall and against part of the two side walls, that means it runs from side wall to side wall along the entire length of the middle wall. So the Gemara says, so that's kosher, as long as the space of the platform is the minimum size to form its own as sukkah. That is, it is at least 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim. It's the minimum size, length and width of a sukkah. So then it is kosher. Now, interestingly, in a situation like that, the entire sukkah is kosher, even the part that does not have a platform raising the floor. Even the part that the schach is too high, it's still kosher. Because you have the platform within it, which is at least part of the sukkah, is a kosher sukkah, the entire sukkah becomes a kosher sukkah. Says the Gemara, however, if you built the platform along one of the side walls, and it only runs along part of the middle wall, so then the halacha is as follows. The part that has the platform is kosher for sure, as long as it's a minimum size of 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim wide and long. What about the rest of the sukkah? So it depends how far it is from the platform to the other side wall, to the side wall which is distant from the platform. The platform doesn't touch that side wall at all. If the distance is 4 amos or more, that space is not kosher. If it's less than 4 amos, then it is kosher. What's the reason? So Gemara says we have the halacha of Zeifin Akuma, which means a bent wall. We view a wall can sometimes be shaped like an L. If it goes, the entire wall runs vertically up to the ceiling, and then I can count up till less than 4 amos of the ceiling as being part of that wall itself. It just bends in a 90-degree angle, but it's still called wall. So I'm going to view here the actual schach that bends from the distant wall towards the space above the platform. I'm going to view that all as part of the wall, part of the distant wall, and then I could say that that distant wall comes straight down to the platform. And if it comes straight down to the platform, then it is kosher, and it counts as a kosher sukkah, the entire thing. However, if it is more than, if it is 4 amos or more, it's no good, because you cannot say the halacha of a bent wall, the daifin akuma, on 4 amos or more. It has to be less than 4 amos, the horizontal part, the roof part of this bent wall. So Gemara says, what's a chiddush here? You're teaching me the halacha of a bent wall. The halacha of the bent wall, the daifin akuma, it's clear, it's explicit. There's a brayta that spells it out. If you have a house and the ceiling got a hole in it, it's a nice big hole in the middle of the ceiling, so you can put schach over it, and it's kosher, as long as the ceiling, the part of the ceiling which remains, measuring from hole to wall, is not 4 amas in any one spot, because I view the ceiling as an extension, a bent extension of the side walls, and therefore the schach is considered to be reaching all the way to the walls. So under the schach itself is kosher sukkah. You can sit under the entire sukkah is kosher. We view the walls as if they reach the schach, and you can sit under the schach part. So you see the halacha of the doif and the kumah straight out. So the Gemara says, no, you might think that this does not count as a doif and a kumah. Over there in the halacha about the ceiling with the hole in it, all we need the doif and the kumah to do is to count as wall, and that makes it that the wall reaches the schach. Here you have to make it into a kosher wall. You may think that it can't make it into a kosher wall. The wall's too tall. It's 20 amas high. In order to make it into a kosher wall, you have to make it reach a platform that minimizes its height. You may think you can't do that if you don't have an existing wall, and therefore it's telling me, no, you could do that. The wall is still a wall. To get it to be the right height is fine. You could just use the halacha of the doif and kumah. Now, the Gemara says the same thing applies if the platform doesn't touch any walls. The platform doesn't reach any of the walls, and as long as the space from the platform to any of the walls is still less than 4 amas, it's all kosher. The Gemara says again, what's a chiddush? You're teaching me the halacha of the bent wall. I can see this from the last case you showed me. The Gemara says, no, the chiddush here is that we say the halacha of the doif and kumah on all 4 sides, on all 4 walls. You may think you only say it on one wall. This teaches me that you say it on all walls. Now the Gemara goes to a similar case where the sukkah is too short. The sukkah is less than 10 tvachim high, and you want to dig a hole in the ground in order to lower the floor level so that the walls and the schach are taller. So the Gemara says you're allowed to do that. However, if your hole that you dig doesn't reach all the way to the walls, there's still a higher level of land between your hole and the walls. So in order for that to be kosher, that higher level cannot be wider than 3 tvachim. Here it's 3 tvachim. It's not 4 amas, it's 3 tvachim. It has to be less than 3 tvachim. The Gemara says, why is this different than all the halachas which we discussed earlier? It should be 4 amas. The Gemara says, no, here you can't use the halacha of the doif and kumah. You cannot call it a bent wall. You have to use lavud. Lavud says is that anything less than 3 tvachim is considered to be closed, and considered to be non-existent. So if the space from the hole to the wall is less than 3 tvachim, we view it as if it's not there. However, to use the bent wall, you can't. What's the reason? Because a wall that's less than 10 tvachim tall is not a wall at all. So you cannot make a wall into a wall by using a bent wall halacha. In order for the bent wall halacha to be used, you have to first have the halacha of a wall. This does not count as a wall. Okay, now the Gemara has another case. The Gemara again goes back to where the sukkah is too tall. The Gemara wants to say, I build a pillar in the middle of the sukkah. The pillar is 4 amas by is 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim width and length. It's 10 tvachim high, and it's too far from the walls. You can't use the walls here. The question is, can I use the sides of the pillar as walls? Can I view the sides of the pillar extend upward as walls? The halacha of good asik, like we've seen in Hilchas Erevin, if you have walls going down from a surface, you could view those walls as if they extend up past the surface and form walls. So here, let me do the same thing. Let me say that I'm going to have my sukkah be the top of the pillar, the top surface of the pillar. It's 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim, so it's big enough. The schach over my head, from the surface of the pillar to the schach is less than 20 amas. Again, from the floor to the schach is more than 20 amas. From the surface of the pillar to the schach is less than 20 amas, so it's good. All I need is walls. I don't have walls. So I'll use the sides of the pillar. I'll say, good asik, the walls extend all the way upward. So Abai wanted to say that should be good. Rava said, no, it's a problem called mechitzas hanikaros. You have to have walls that you can see. These don't count as walls that you can see. Now the Gemara brings a brayso with a machlokes and tanoim on a similar subject. The Gemara will have a machlokes amaroim. What exactly is the machlokes tanoim? Machlokes tanoim, the way we have it listed in the brayso, is that if you stick 4 poles in the ground, just 4 poles, and you put schach held up by these 4, no walls, just 4 corner poles. So what's the halacha of that? The Gemara says the machlokes. Rav Yaakov says it's kosher, and the Chachamim say it's possible. So the Gemara has the machlokes between Rav Huna and Rav Yaakov. The Gemara has the machlokes between Rav Huna and Rav Nachman. What exactly is the case of this machlokes? Rav Huna says it's talking about where you put it on the 4 corners of a roof. So you have walls. You know what the walls are? The walls are the sides of the building. Same principle we said with the pillar before. You extend the sides of the building upward, and they hit the schach. So you use gorasik. But that's a situation in which there's a machlokas. That's the situation in which Rav Yaakov says it is kosher, and the Chachamim say no, you need to have mechitzas hanikaros that doesn't count as visible walls. Rav Yaakov says that it does because you can see the walls. Now, if, however, you did not have walls extending upwards to meet the schach, at least halachically, then this would be no good. This would not count as a kosher sukkah according to anybody. Now, Rav Nachman disagrees. Rav Nachman says, no, we're talking about even in the middle of the roof, where you don't have any walls around to use. There's no walls meeting the schach. The walls of the roof extend upward, they hit the air, they're nowhere near the schach. Just some space in the middle of the roof, you put down 4 poles, that's enough. The Gemara will explain later how that works. So the Gemara says, so this is machlokes between Rav Huna and Rav Nachman, what the case of this machlokes is. The Gemara says, my question, according to Rav Nachman, is a machlokes about both of them? They argue about both cases, both where you have the edge walls and where you don't have the edge walls. There's a machlokes about both of those, or not. The Gemara says it's a taker. We don't know. According to Rav Nachman, we don't know if there's a machlokes about both cases or not. Maybe it's just in the middle where there's no edge walls. So Gemara says we have a clear proof, we have a clear brisa that says that Rav Huna's interpretation is wrong. And the Gemara quotes the brisa, which clearly says if you take 4 poles and you put them down on the ground, stam on the floor, and you put schach on top of them, that counts. The same machlok as Rav Yaakov and the Chachamim. So there clearly there's no walls extending upward, and therefore that's a clear disproof of Rav Huna's opinion. One wants to say maybe our Mishnah itself therefore disproves Rav Huna, because our Mishnah shows that there's only one machlokas, and the machlokas is clearly in the case where there are no edge walls to extend upward. This is not necessarily Rav Huna could be right. It could be that there's machlokas in both cases. The only reason that the Mishnah mentioned the case where there's no edge walls is to show that even there Rav Yaakov is machsher. But it could be that Rav Yaakov would be machsher, and the Chachamim would still say it's no good even in the case where there are edge walls. So we don't know for sure whether there's a machlokas in both cases or not. Now the Gemara just spells out what is actually the reasoning of Rav Yaakov. Why does he say if you have just 4 poles, that's enough? So Gemara says it's very similar to the case which we've seen in Maseches Eruvin, of where you build 4 corner pieces around the well. And each corner piece has a tefach on each side. So you just need a tefach for each corner on each side. That way each side wall has a tefach on each end, from its corner piece on each end. So 2 tefachim for each end. I view them as they connect, and that counts as 4 walls. Rav Yaakov says you can do the same thing here. Now, even though this is a case where you use round poles, as long as the circumference of the roundness of the pole is big enough that if I were to carve it out square, I would have a tefach on each corner, on each side of the corner, that's enough, and therefore it counts, and that's a kosher sukkah. The Chachamim say no, you can only use a tefach for 1 wall. You have to have 2 full walls minimum, and you can only use a tefach for a full.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.